Hello and welcome to JamHammer. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how to assemble and paint Skitarii from the Forge world of Mars, according to the Warhammer 40K Imperium magazine, with a few alternative options thrown in there for good measure. These are some amazing looking models with a great retro sci-fi aesthetic that I'm really excited to build and paint, plus they provide multiple build choices, customization, and weapon options. We received 2 sprues that contain enough parts to make a squad of 10 of these minis across issues 21 and 22 of this Partworks magazine series from Hachette and Games Workshop. The first of these issues deals with assembly, so we'll be going to that one first, and we immediately hit a bit of a snag. Flicking through, and you can see that the guide is quite prescriptive, only detailing how to assemble these models the way that Imperium magazine wants you to. This is primarily so that the rules and scenarios that they have written for this squad in later issues can be applied to these specific builds. This is especially problematic as you can see that this guide only includes instructions for making these into a Rangers squad armed with the musket adjacent galvanic rifles. Taking a closer look at the sprues though, and these are the same ones that you get with a box of Skitarii purchased directly from Games Workshop, meaning we have all the metallic helmets and radium carbines necessary for assembling these as the Rangers' rad-soaked counterparts, the Vanguard. Personally, I want to create a mix of both, because I don't intend for these to be a 40k unit, but rather a complete Hunter Clade kill team that was introduced with White Dwarf number 468. Or rather it would be a complete one if the Doom balanced data slate hadn't granted another operative, meaning that if you purchase a box of Skitarii, you're now one short of a full roster of 11. But I digress. So I created a sketch of which equipment options I wanted the models to be built with. And hit another problem. I wanted to include a Vanguard with a data tether, not too tricky, just switch the head out, and replace the arm with one holding a carbine. I also wanted to include a Ranger with an Omnispex, but these equipment options both use the same torso. So I scanned through the other body and leg options for the generic Skitarii, and using the one that looked the most static, attached the Omnispex and the one-handed rifle to this body instead. With a little bit of coercion, this fit alright, and the sculpt looks like it's glancing down at the screen on the scanner. Not too bad. For their increased maneuverability, I planned to build most of these as Vanguard, but didn't have the instructions to assemble these in the magazine. Luckily, these sprues are intuitively laid out, and you just need to pick the nearby carbine. With this one, for example, I'm using the torso pieces numbered 34 and 35, so the arms for making it a Vanguard are next to it, part numbers 36 and 37. When it came to assembling the special weapons operatives, I followed the instructions from issue 21 more or less exactly the same, as I wanted my kill team to have the full arsenal of all 3 choices. The only difference was that I wanted the option to include the plasma caliber and arc rifle into either a Ranger or Vanguard unit in the future if I do decide on a full 40k AdMech army. To ensure that they were future-proofed, I used a couple of these exposed head options like this, so that they are flexible now and can be included in either configuration of Skitarii. I couldn't see the transuranic arquebus ever being in a Vanguard unit though, so I assembled this one with a Ranger head. Finally, the Alpha was going to be a Vanguard 2 with different weapon options. Pretty simple switch, and just included the arc pistol instead of the Imperium's choice for a phosphor blast pistol. The Centurion-esque helmeted heads for the leader though were tucked away with all the other generic head options, so I eventually found these and opted for the vertical fin. And these are all assembled. Managed to get all the equipment options I wanted, all the special weapons, mostly Vanguard operatives, but I couldn't resist just having the one Ranger there because their hoods and rifles just look so cool. Time to paint. Turning to issue 22 then, and the first thing they want us to do is go straight in and apply 3 coats of Leadbelcher all over the minis. If you've watched any of my other videos in this Imperium painting series, I tend to follow their instructions to the letter and then just gripe about it. However, I actually want to use these minis, so this time I'm going to prime my models first with a light all-over coat of black primer like so. This way we have a better surface for applying all of our subsequent layers over, plus a nice dark base that our metallic paints in particular will look great over. I'm also not going to waste time and apply needless layers of paint that will obscure details on my models by applying a metallic paint to areas that are going to be a different colour. I'm also going to start with the matte colours and work inwards, so starting off with the red cloak instead then, which is actually step 2 in the Imperium guide. They say to apply 3 coats of corn red onto the cloaks. However, they also include Mephiston Red as part of this magazine series. Skipping to the end, and their final results look a lot darker than the Mars scheme on the Games Workshop box, so I'm going to disobey them again here and instead use this lighter red. Going to thin this down with some water so it flows nicely from the brush like this, and apply this all over the long flowing robe as well as picking out the sleeves. Then leave this to dry while we move on to the next model. So after one coat, this is some pretty good coverage from this paint, considering it's such a light colour going over a black base. But it's still pretty dark with plenty of that undercoat showing through, so applying a second thin layer of Mephiston Red. Now, the guide suggests painting the inside of the robe with this colour too, but I'm going to leave that black for now as, again, looking at the box art, these are painted a cream colour instead. The second coat is finished, we've left it to dry, and that's looking great. No undercoat showing through, and we have a smooth layer of bright red all over. The guide suggests 3 layers, but this seems like overkill to me, as 2 seems to be enough. The guide then moves on to paint all of the weapon coils with Macragge Blue, but I'm ignoring that for now. Instead, I'm going to use the Rakarth Flesh we received in issue 24 of the Imperium series, and thin this down and use it to cover all the inside of the cloak, as well as the paper on the purity seals. It can be a bit tricky reaching inside here, but no worries if we go over, as we can tidy this up later, particularly the legs and the armour that we'll be painting later in the guide anyway. I'm also going to try and pick out the edge of the robe with Rakarth Flesh too, then leave this to dry and apply it to the rest of the minis. One coat later, and you can see there have been a few slip-ups to tidy later, but otherwise some pretty good coverage after just one layer of paint. Moving on then, and in the same issue that received Mephiston Red, we also received a part of Mournfang Brown. This is a deep, rich colour that I'm going to thin down a little and apply to the stocks and housing on the guns. Doesn't matter again too much if this goes all over the trim on the weapons, as we're going to be painting over these later too. The guide says to paint the guns with Leadbelcher and leave them, but this material is clearly wood. The Games Workshop pictures have them painted brown, and the Imperium magazine has provided us with a brown paint, so they're getting painted brown. I'm applying this to all the weapons too, like this rifle, and the Alpha's arc pistol here. Jumping ahead a bit here, but the guide from Hatchet does say to paint the rosettes on the purity seals with Screamer Pink. I'm doing this now because I'm getting all the matte colours done first before applying the metallics, because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to go and change my water to get all the metallic flecks out later. Be on the lookout for these hidden around, as a lot of these minis have 2 of these seals concealed about their person. Moving on to Abaddon Black now, and we just want to use this to cover over any areas that we may have slipped over that we want to be black. Namely, the trousers of Skitarii that have likely been hit with red and cream at this stage, but also the gloved hands in some cases too, and these cables that are protruding all over them. There may be places where your primer didn't catch, like on the underneath of this mini, that I'm going to get with that black paint too. Bit of an optional step here, but I noticed that the unit's backpacks had a leather covering on them, held shut with buckled straps. The guide wants us to paint these with Leadbelcher too, but I'm going to grab a leather brown paint from my personal supply of paints and use this here. You can find affiliate links, as usual, in the description below to any of the tools and materials I use in these videos that weren't included with the magazine subscription. If you're interested in purchasing any of these, you can use those links, it won't cost you any extra money, but a few pennies will go to help supporting the channel. Instead of leather brown, you could just leave this black, as this would work well with the trousers and gloves, or you could use that Mournfang Brown instead, maybe lined with a tiny percentage of Rakarth Flesh to set it apart from the wooden stocks. I'm also going to pick out any other leather, like the belts and pouches with this colour, just so it's tied in across the models. While we're doing optional steps, I opted for some exposed head choices, so I need to paint these with a Fleshtone. I'm raiding my Vallejo set again for a bronze Fleshtone, and I'm going to mix 50-50 with an off-white bone colour and pick out those small bits on the two special weapon gunners. If you wanted to do the same using the Citadel paints from the Imperium magazine, I'd recommend Rakarth Flesh again, but lightened with a touch of Corax White. And now we're onto the metallics, namely Leadbelcher. This step may unfortunately take quite a while, as these augmented humans are more machined now. So we want to use this colour on the armour plating on their legs, knees, and their mechanical feet. We want to get the armour on their chest, and any of these ribbed metallic cables too. We want to paint the face paints of the Rangers and the helmets of the Vanguard. Their shoulder armour, the cables and machinery on their backpacks, including the antenna. Then onto the weapons, and Leadbelcher's going onto the clips and triggers. And then be on the lookout for any of their arms that have been replaced with machinery too, like this one holding the Omnispecs. And we should be about done. We're back on track with the Imperium guide now, as we apply our second metallic paint, Runelord Brass. This is going onto some of the ends of the cables on their backpacks. You can mix and match these and apply it how you see fit, just to break up some of the monotony from all being Leadbelcher. I'm picking out the tops of their backpacks with this too, so it looks like a coil of some kind. Then we're going to use this colour to pick out the raised details on their armour, so carefully along these trims that run all along the outside. If we do slip over, we can go back over again with Leadbelcher at the end just to neaten it up. We also want to use this on the weapon details too, so those raised decorative areas on the rifles and carbines, as well as the bits around the coils on the arc weapons, like the Alpha's pistol here. I'm going to use some to catch the raised details on the leader's decorative helmet too. And that's about it. Now's a good time to check over your minis and cover up any mistakes like myself, where I've messed up quite a bit on these red robes. Just going to go over these areas again with some more Mephiston Red, and then going through my unit, I noticed a few bits that I'd missed with the Leadbelcher, like this Vanguard shoulder, and some of the areas around the backpack. Once everyone's looking neat and tidy, we're going to apply some Agrax Earthshade. Normally, I wouldn't apply this over silver metallics like Leadbelcher, and would opt for Nuln Oil, but the guide recommends it, and I agree in this instance. The Skitarii is supposed to be equipped with ancient technologies from the Forge Worlds, and I want to lean into this fluff by making them look rusted and battered. So we're applying this all over the minis, making sure to stop it pooling in any one spot, and covering entire areas in one go to avoid any tide marks from forming. Leave these plenty of time to dry, and then we can see that we've got a really nice weathered appearance on our minis. Time to do just a few highlights. The Agrax has stained the inner parts of their cloaks a little too much for my taste, so I'm just going to thin out some of that Vallejo bone colour again, and use this to re-establish a little of that colour, especially on the crests of the folds in the cloth. I'm also going to use this colour to add a few highlights to the raised parts of the flesh on the gunners, just to bring that out a bit more. Next up, the guide does say to go back in and relay the cloaks. For them, it's using corn red, so I'm going to do the same and relay here, but using Mephiston. We want to thin this way down so that it's very transparent, and then apply gradually thinner layers, working from the recesses up onto the creases in the cloth like this, to add a subtle highlight to where the material will be lighter. Try to avoid the recesses as much as possible to let that shade paint sit there, and then just highlight those raised parts. This is very thin paint at this point, so we'll probably need a few layers of this just to keep building up until we have a smooth transition all over the cloaks of our Skitarii. Lastly, we're using Corax White to paint the Adamek symbols on the front of our minis. Thin this down a little and get your brush to a fine point so you can paint the right half of the cog and the left side of the skull like this. This paint has great coverage with a smooth finish over a black base from just one thin coat. I'm also going to use this paint on those lenses dotted over the models, such as this one's eyes and the camera thing on the shoulder. Then I'm going to get the weapon coils with this white paint too, as well as a few cables here and there. Now, returning to the second step in the guide, finally, I'm going to thin Macragge Blue way down and apply a very fine layer of this over the areas we've just painted with Corax, like the weapon coils and the lenses. The paint should hopefully flow into the recesses, leaving the raised areas white and create a fast and easy glow effect. A final optional step, and that's grabbing a yellow paint and using it to cover those cables I painted white too, following up with some horizontal black stripes to make them look like hazard wires. I also stippled a bit of black paint on the paper parts of the purity seals too to make them appear as though they had writing on them. I'm going to quickly base these too, and again lean in towards the style in the box art, which means a sandy base with a few rocks dotted about. For this, I'm using these basing materials from a set that I'll leave a link to in the description below. To apply these, I'm using some great quality PVA bond, thinned with some water to flow smoothly. I'm pasting this all over, then dipping the bases into a pot filled with the sand and allowing this to dry. Then, going back, adding a dab or two in the base again before placing some of the cork pieces to simulate rocks. I'll paint these using the Mournfang Brown on the sand, and mixing Abaddon Black 50/50 with Corax White for the grey rocks, and then apply a final layer of Agrax Earthshade over the whole thing. And we're done! A kill team of 10 different Skitarii painted up, ready to carry out some specialist skirmish battles in the name of the Omnissiah. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider liking it, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the bell to be notified of new videos being released. Overall, I diverged quite a bit from the method and scheme from the Imperium magazine. We do still have a predominantly red-cloaked mini with a lot of metallics, but I think the areas where I strayed were valid. Using a primer will not only provide a good solid foundation for your minis, but will help to prolong and protect the paint you apply down the line. The guide often wanted us to waste a lot of time and resources, plus risk the finer details on our models by applying multiple layers of unnecessary paint to areas that don't need them. I much prefer the brighter Mephiston Red they provide us with over the darker Corn Red, and think the results are a bit more visually striking. I also liked introducing extra instances where biological materials like leather and wood are more starkly contrasted against the cybernetic aspects of the sculpts. There'll be more videos about these AdMech Skitarii being released in the future, so please do keep an eye out for new Warhammer 40K content coming soon to JamHammer. In the meantime, there are plenty of other videos available on the channel, including a few that are on screen now for you to click on. Thanks again for watching.